Can I get a special round of applause for this guy that's flown in from LA? He's the brains, I'm the brawn. Right, so welcome. Paul Gilby approached me and said, do you want to do a seminar? And I said, 40 years of the DX7. It's been made 1983. I thought, why not? But then I guess you guys kind of all know about the DX7. It's the most popular keyboard in the world ever. It was the best-selling keyboard for many years. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, why don't we do something a little bit different? So there's the proper title. 40 years of Yamaha FM synthesis. And what we brought today, we brought the birthday girl. So she's 40 years old this year. As you know, I'm Rob Puricelli. And before we do anything else, can I please draw your attention to the screen? We know, okay, it's linear phase modulation.
Now you tell me.
So, got that one out of the way. Excellent. Right, so what we want to do is we want to show you how we went from this, DX7, to this. And this is the MODX 7 Plus. And we chose this one because it's got the same number. Mm-hmm. So we just kind of want to show you where FM technology from Yamaha went and where it's ended up. But to do that, I just want to give you a bit of a history lesson because that's my bag. So this is a brief Yamaha FM timeline. 1967, Dr. John Chowning discovered FM synthesis when he was doing research into sort of multi-channel audio and all this kind of stuff that they do at Stanford. It's all way above my pay grade. But he discovered this method that if you take a sine wave, and you modulate it with another sine wave, and you adjust the frequencies and the ratios, it makes a very complex waveform with which you can make lovely bell sounds and other sounds as well. So 1973, Stanford, as all universities do to finance their ongoing progress, they sold the patent. They'd hawked it around to various places, Hammond, Lowry, all the big organ manufacturers, because as we know, FM's really good at organ sounds. And none of them wanted it. Yamaha took a chance. They sent some engineers over to Stanford. They took a look, they thought, yeah, this is good, we can work with something. Mm-hmm. And they went away in 1973 with the technology, and they released their first FM synthesizer in 1981. So it took a good 8 years to fettle this into something. Now, these were preset machines, the GS1 and the GS2. And they do FM differently to what we're used to with Yamaha. It's basically cross-modulation. So you have pairs of operators, and then you can cross-modulate.
Right. It is not algorithmic.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. It is just an FM synthesizer with a fixed algorithm.
Yeah, and they're all preset machines. There was no way of programming them apart from if you had one of the very rare giant four-screen programmers, of which there's only a handful ever made. One's at Karma, still in a glass case or something. There are a few others around here and there. So preset machines only. The following year, 1982, some significant things happened. They managed to whittle this down into the CE20 and the CE25, which looked like home organs, the sort of portatone type things. But they were proper FM synths, again with presets. The CE25 had the marvelous symphonic mode that Yamaha had. It just sounds amazing. I should have brought one up with me, but they are really, if you can get hold of one, they're really, really nice machines. But also in that year, something very, very important happened, and that's kind of going to be the crux of my part of the demonstration, and that was that MIDI 1.0, MIDI back then, MIDI was announced. So the likes of Dave Smith and Takahashi-san from Roland and a number of others got together, and they formed this standard. But of course, it wasn't absolutely forged in steel at that point. It was still a little bit flaky here and there. As we all know, the DX7 came out just in 83, didn't have the full velocity, so it only goes to 100, not 127. So yes, again, we know about that. But it was the dawn of digital synthesizer, the DX7, and MIDI 1.0 being ratified in 1983 that really changed how musicians could make music electronically with digital gear. The following year, they launched this little thing, which is the Yamaha RX11 drum machine. So it's 12-bit samples, as it was of the day. Nice little drum machine. Then they also launched this in October, which is the QX1 sequencer. And this was specifically designed to be used with the TX816, which you can't see, or you can see the back end of it, but it's 8 DX7 engines in a rack. And by 1985, they had merged these units, the RX11, the QX1, and the TX816, into a system that they called Y-cams. The whole point of MIDI was that you could communicate between different manufacturers, but it was also to enable a musician to do so much more than they could have done previously. MIDI technology allowed for multiple. Do you know that phone's probably got an FM chip in it, by the way? That was quick, wasn't it?
Well, PL3.
Should have been a comedian. MIDI allowed people to communicate with drum machines, with sequencers, with synthesizers, different makes, different brands, same makes, same brands. It really expanded. You had to be there. So I can't really see many of you, but I'm assuming a majority of you are probably over the age of 50, maybe? I'm insulting anyone. But you have to be of that age to remember, and to have been around to remember the impact. Mm-hmm. Hands up who's a Howard Jones fan. That's a good amount of hands. Hands up who thought, how the hell does he do what he does on stage? One man, all those synths. Yeah. And yet this was before the dawn of MIDI. Howard Jones was doing this stuff. He was programming stuff in between songs. MIDI allowed you to just program all your stuff and then just press a button and go. So it was a real revolution. It gave musicians freedom. I apologize for the Phil Collins picture. This one's especially for my friend Andrew Ward. Unheard of control, complex sequencing, recordable patch changes, program changes, timing was rock solid most of the time, cross-manufacturer use, and an almost limitless set of possibilities. So Yamaha jumped on this and they said, we can offer musicians something totally unique. We can give them a box with 8 DX7s in a 4U rack unit. We can give them a sequencer with 8 individual MIDI outputs to drive those 8 individual DX7 modules. We can give them a drum machine. They can stick it all through our amplification systems. Here is a whole system, and they called it, imaginatively, Y-cams. Now, Y-cams stands for Yamaha Computer Aided Music System, and this is an advert from around that time, 1985, and you can see it referenced, but I'm guessing not a lot of you, unless you've spoken to me, and I'm sorry, but you probably haven't heard of Y-cams. Not a lot of people have. But here it is. This is the Y-cam system, all ready and hopefully fired up to go. So let's have a look at the component parts. TX816 is a beast. Managed to finally get hold of one of these it was this year. It's 8 DX7s in a box. You can play them individually, so you can have 8 separate parts, as you'll hear in just a moment. Or you can put them all together and play them as one instrument, as Manny will demonstrate to you shortly, and you get an immense sound, and you think, that's FM, wow. So that was the TX816. Then you had the QX1, which is this lovely, giant, big slab of metal and plastic with a 5¼ floppy disk drive, which I'm very proud to say, we're operating off 5¼ inches. So thank you. It's my achievement for the day. So that was the sequencer. New Order were big fans of this. Many bands use this. Many artists use this live. I know Mike Lindup had a big rig with a QX1 and a TX816 and a KX88. He was endorsed by Yamaha. Just a super powerful machine. A little bit slow and clunky. You have to have a floppy disk in there for it to work. So it's always exchanging data. There's no sort of built-in memory RAM. So it's a bit clunky, but it gets there. And then the RX11, which is this little baby here, 12-bit drum machine. And that gave you Y-cams. Now, I was very, very fortunate. I can't see him. Put your hand up, Simon. Where are you? There we go. Thank you, Simon. He's very shy. Now, Simon and I got a long history of synth nerdery and collecting, and Simon bought a QX1, and in his QX1 was this. And this is the Y-cams demonstration pack. Now, only dealers and demonstrators would get this, so this wasn't available ever in the shops, and it contains a bunch of data for the QX1, patch data for the TX816, sounds, or patterns, should I say, for the RX11. And I'd never seen this before, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I can demonstrate this to you live, on stage, in front of 300 people. Hopefully it'll all go well. But these were used at demonstrations like this. Now, I know the guy behind the DX Club is here somewhere today. There he is. Hey, was this one of yours? Yep, there we go. Now, excellent. This guy here, is a friend of mine, didn't know that until about a year ago. He said, yeah, I was there, and there he is, looking very sternly at the great Dave Bristow. And Dave was instrumental, excuse the pun, in designing a bunch of the preset sounds for the DX7 and much more besides. So Ycams connects like this. It's very, very simple. 8 MIDI outs from the QX1 to 8 MIDI ins on the TX816. The drum machine goes out on the 8th module through into the drum machine, and then you can connect any keyboard, whether it's a DX7 or a controller. Obviously, Yamaha stuff works natively.
The KX88.
The KX88, exactly. So that was the system. Now, I don't know whether, do you want to just come and show people on screen? Can we cut to the camera? There we go. So, excuse the dust. It's authentic. So this is the QX1. Can you get a top shot there? So it's a 2-line LCD display, which is not very bright in these lights. And then just all your tracks are listed here, and then there's a big tempo knob here with no markings on it. You just guess. But there you go. And then just down here is the TX816, which you can see is all loaded up with our sounds. And then the RX11, which is just over there. Excellent. Thank you very much. Round of applause for the cameraman. Thank you. So I thought just the simplest way of demonstrating this was to play one of these demonstration patches. So put yourself into early 1980s mode. Remember that far back.
In Los Angeles.
So there was a TV show, and I'll let you try and guess the name of the TV show. Hopefully those of us old enough to know will remember it. And fingers crossed this all works. So this theme song to this show was written on a Ycam system. And in fact, the first 2 seasons of the show, the title music was completely Ycams. I think season 3, they eventually got a budget big enough to get some real musicians in. So fingers crossed this will all work, and see if you can remember what this piece of music was. No, we're there. No. There we go. Let's all applaud the computer.
The computer.
And this is what an 80s boy band would look in the 80s. Just press go and stand here looking pretty.
Basically. Yeah. So anybody out there with a clue what that's from?
No. Sorry?
Close.
Saying Elsewhere.
Saying Elsewhere.
That was a demonstration of the Ycam system. Everything you heard came out of either the TX816 or the RX11, and it was programmed by the legend that is Gary Leuenberger, who, along with the likes of Don Lewis, Dave Bristow, programmed some of those amazing sounds, and they are amazing sounds, I don't care what you say, in the DX7 and all of the other stuff of that era, followed very closely by this man on my right. So I'm going to load up the TX816 now with Manny sound. So if you want to,
Vamp?
Phil.
Vamp. Very good. So one of the things that was great about FM synthesis when it arrived on the landscape, or the soundscape as it were, was it was a completely different timbral space than all the analog synthesis that came before it. And also it was so dynamic. And so there's many, many reasons why the DX7 became very, very popular, but bottom line is price, performance, and sound. You had a Prophet 5, you had a JP8, $4,000 or $5,000 machines, you had your DX7, under 2,000, 16-note polyphony, velocity aftertouch. These are features that totally blew away the market, and then put together with a sound engine that actually was responsive to that. So at the time, you know, I like to say FM was the shining light through the clouds of analog because of its timbre space was so different. And even though this is so much, that demo is such a capture of its time, there's a very wide timbre space that one synthesis method can fill. And most importantly, it all works together very, very well. Because those of you that have dabbled around in FM, you kind of notice that it sort of has, it can play in the low bass, it can play in the mids, it can play in the highs, and it's a very, how can I say, it's a very discrete types of timbres that all mix together, where analog, no matter how you program it out, they all have a various footprint that honestly is hard to mix and hard to blend and do other things with. So there was some very important sonic characteristics of FM that really made it stand out at the time. So, are we loaded?
We're loaded.
Okay. So, my history with Yamaha is from about 1986 forward. And the first thing that I was hired to do was to essentially make FM not sound like that anymore. True story. Some of you may have heard this story on Rob's podcast, but DX7 ruled the roost in the synthesizer market for many, many, many years, and its space was finally displaced by the Roland D50. And the Roland D50 had something that the DX7 did not, which was onboard effects, and of course, little bits of samples in the first thing there. And so there are some very, very famous Roland D50 sounds that were moving them out the door at record speed, and Yamaha went down on that because, most importantly, the DX7 II did not have onboard effects. But what the DX7 II did have was the dual engine a la the DX1 and the DX5. Unfortunately, Yamaha's programming stagnated to investigate what you could do with 12 operators in a holistic sense, as opposed to layering two 6 operator voices together. So that's where I came in. I started from stuff that I'd done beforehand on my own with the TX816 to do integrative multi-operator voices, bringing that concept to the DX7 II. So my first little thing I gave out to a friend of mine at a music store was a floppy disk that had D50 emulations. And that finally caught Yamaha's ear, and my first gig was to do a series of Yamaha support discs that basically modernized the sound of the DX7 to incorporate things like the Roland had, which was more chiffy attacks, transients that were more like samples, but more importantly, built-in choruses, reverb tails, so that it could play in that same space. And it was very, very successful. So ever since then, I've programmed every one of these beasties for them. Like I said, I was brought in to just sort of change the character and investigate other stuff that you could do, where I'm using all of my operators at my disposal to do discrete, different interactive parts of the sound. It's a technique that I call harmonic component modeling, which we will show you the end version of that at the very end here. But besides your clinky doorbell, your FM can do. Graded pads, because you have up to 96 envelopes in a TX816. that your sound can evolve with. Forgot, no aftertouch on this. Sorry about that. But you can also investigate sonic spaces that are significantly different than what you would typically hear in a DX7. You can do some good virtual analog. Is FM thin? This is a patch that is a basic FM type string sound, but it uses some of the modules dedicated to do a simulated reverb tail. I'm going to do this real quick. This is without it. Back with it. So that's all using FM to simulate what the reverb would sound like layered in with the other parts. So this became a big direction that we started investigating as FM evolved into more complicated systems. So if those of you know your FM history, after the DX7 II, we went into the SY series, which was a huge breakthrough in FM because it did a couple of things very unique in even synthesizers today, in that it has multiple feedback loops. It has non-sine waveforms. You can actually use zero frequency wave shaper modes. And these all interact through a set of digital filters that gives capabilities that, honestly, it's the widest timbre space with the least effort. So I think FM is really, really cool in that regard. We came up to the montage, and we have other stuff in it that we'll show a little later, and I'll go through some actual dedicated FM, but I want to finish with this. This is something I put together just for this. This is a hybrid of my programming style with the 816 as a multi-track. So I'm just going to play one chord here and let it play out. Keyboard movie cue. So, want to get into some science? Let's get into some science. Science! People always ask, how do you program FM? I don't mean this facetiously. It's actually very simple. You just have to drop your preconceptions that it behaves like analog synthesis, because it does not. It is not a subtractive method of synthesis. It is an additive method of synthesis. And how we add our sounds together is by doing this modulation relationship that Dr. Chowning discovered. We have our modulators and our carriers that interact. And what I say it's simple is that your modulator, you can think of, it's the one you hear, okay? So it's the one that you have volume control over, okay? Your modulator is the operator or oscillator that's going to cause the change in that carrier. So you hear the effects of it, okay? And these effects are controlled by two properties, index and modulation and ratio, okay? Ratio is the frequency relationship between the two, and modulator index is basically how deep or how strong that interaction is. It's the knob that goes to 11, okay? So the frequencies you're going to hear in your resulting harmonic spectra are related to very simple mathematics of sideband creation that are based on the ratio intervals of those things. So if you have a 1-to-1 ratio in Yamaha speak and you start raising the index, you're going to start creating all the harmonics of the harmonic series in varying levels, okay? If the ratio is 2-to-1, okay, you're going to start doing all the odds, because 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 2 is 5, plus, okay. And again, their intensities will all vary with the modulation index, in other words, how it gets brighter. But the key to FM, next slide please, is this. This is what drove everybody crazy. Who remembers seeing these graphs in the magazines in the day? Anybody? All right. This is what's called a Bessel function, okay? Bessel function is based on the mathematics of membranes. It has to do with how nodes and peaks evolve with the amplitude of the excitation. So let's go to the other situation. So
This one?
yeah, that one. So it means as you increase index, your harmonics don't evolve linearly. So oddly enough, linear FM or linear phase modulation, your harmonic evolution does not just get brighter. The amplitude of each individual harmonic goes up and down based on these curves, based on the fact that this process is a through zero process. So you have all those negative harmonics reflecting back out of phase into your positive space that further creates unpredictabilities, as it were, in terms of what the sound sounds like. So when you talk about the FM sound, it's very characteristic of these Bessel function behaviors. So in a two-operator standpoint, this is what is both what's great and what's horrible about FM, because its sound can be very characteristic, but since this is so complex a relationship with index, it's also why it's so dynamic to velocity or modulations. So the goal as a sound designer is how to tame these things and put them together to get a result that you want, whether it's a target goal of sounding like X, Y, Z, or just to fulfill what our image is. And the way that you learn FM synthesis is the math I just told you is all you need to know, that simple little bit. Because Dr. Chowning very, very famously said that the important thing about FM is that it is an ear talent. It's not about the math, it's about what you hear. And if you think about all traditional forms of synthesis, the most important thing is you twiddle something until you hear what you like, right? Whether it's analog synthesizer, subtractive, or whatever. You have to approach FM the same way, okay? So how long did it take you to understand you needed to use like a sawtooth wave to make a brassy sound? Okay, did you know that when you first went up to standard synthesizer? No, okay? How you had to tweak the filter, how you had to tweak the envelopes. Those are all the same concepts. So the key is using your ear, okay, to listen to see what happens when you are programming FM. And I'm going to do a very, very simple demonstration here in real time. If they can pull up our screen, that would be great.
Right.
All right, so performing without a net. Now let's go here. Okay, so we're going to start with Chowning's classic single operator pair. I'm going to bring up the feedback up to 7. Is that coming through okay?
Yep.
All right, so what we're going to demonstrate in an audible sense is what that graph shows, okay? So this is let me get our sine wave up here. So we have no modulation index, it's a pure sine wave. We're going to start bringing up the level of our modulator in a 1-to-1 relationship. Okay, use your ear here. Listen for the fundamental. You hear it disappearing right there? We have fundamental, so our carrier is fully heard. But now it's fully phase canceled. There is no fundamental here. So check this out. If we go to our carrier, which right now is 1 to 1, now we're going to shift it over 1. Check out what happens when it changes to 2. Our fundamental came back. Very nerdy, I know. But listening for those changes in FM is what's key. Because you can make FM sound really however you want it as long as you know how to play in or out of those spaces. So one of the things that was huge in the advent of the DX7 compared to the GS1 and the GS2 beforehand is what they call the digital programmable algorithmic synthesizer, right? Because the algorithms are what make it special, because you can mix and match these in certain ways to do things the GS1 and GS2 couldn't even begin to. Well, except for the fact they had the world's best symphonic circuit, short of a Juno 6, right? But we'll digress. So when I teach people how to program FM, I tell them you want to start with 2 operator pairs, because very simply, you want to understand how that comes into changing the sonic characteristic of the sound. And if you get to a point where you don't like it, back it off and use your other operators to do something else. So one of the classic things in the way I approach a virtual analog synthesis in a DX7 is I use some operator groups to get a really good solid low mid-range, and I'll use different operator groups just to do the high end. I don't try to get it all in one operator pair because the math doesn't let you do it. So that's what the ear training, ear experience is the phrase we use, that you just have to get. And it's the same with any other synthesis system that we have. So I'm going to back out of this for a second, and I'm going to show you how we get to montage. So what is really cool about montage and the MODX and the current version as the state of FM? And that is they have a sophisticated 8-operator engine that has some non-sine waveforms. And in addition to that, it has something very, very important, which is the fact that it has massive real-time control and modulations that you didn't have back in the day. So Rob has in his rack in here a FS1R, which is not hooked up, but it's one of the unicorns of Yamaha's FM because it did something called format sequencing. But that's a subset of FM, which if you know how to deal with FM, normally you can actually create format sequences in a montage. Nice little synthetic didgeridoo. This is real-time control of FM parameters. That's one single patch. That's not a blend, that's not a layer. That's one set of 8 operators being real-time controlled for ratio, index, envelope times, and all that sort of stuff. It's what they call a smart morph patch, and I turn the motion sequence off. You can play this in real time. That's pretty cool. At least I think it is. So again, a lot of timbre spaces within a simple interaction of two operators. So I'm going to finish with a project I did for Yamaha, what was it, about two and a half years ago, 3 years ago now. I decided to say, hey, I want to do something really silly, and that is I want to build a convincing grand piano out of FM. Like, can stand on its own and do stuff that you didn't think. And so utilizing the montage engine in this concept of harmonic component modeling, I took all those 8 operators across 8 voices to build all the parts of the piano individually. So I have harp sounds, I have hammer attack sounds, I've got bass register sounds that are completely different than the mid-range pan, which is up at the top, to bring in a piano into a morphable situation. So I'm going to play this because this is kind of fun. But that's synthesis, that's not samples, so I can do this as well. That's one of the things I think is particularly unique about the power of FM. Using some very simple interactions, you can get widely variant timbres with a minimum amount of computational power, a minimum amount of programming access, and just playing around till you like the sound. All right, let me get this up. This particular patch in Moonlight Sonata demonstrates a lot of those little nuances on getting the attacks just right, getting sustains just right, and where it goes into the third movement, you're going to hear something that I think is very unique to the synthesis. The dynamicism coming up here is characteristic of FM.
Thank you very much. We've been the Chip Shop Boys. Thank you.